Well played, Captain. You finally landed me.
Don't flatter yourself. I'm after a bigger fish. Your partner.
Now, Graves is too smart to walk into a trap. If you think he'd be stupid enough to bash...
I'm in with the haven't you people ever heard of closing a goddamn door?
Hello, himbos and hellions. My name is Sky, and, well, there it is. There's the Bilgewater animated short. Riot kind of faked me out on it a little bit by going off of their 3-day cadence for these things. So I was like, hey, we're not getting one. But no, in conjunction with the Rising Tides expansion for Legends of Runeterra, there is the animated short for Bilgewater, which seemed to me to confirm that we're not going to be getting a Shuriman short or a Targonian short or an Ishtal short or a Bandle City short or etc., because those regions aren't in Legends of Runeterra. And to the best of my knowledge, only Targon is currently planned to be added to the game, probably 6 months down the line or something along those lines. And at that point, maybe we'll get an animated short for those as well. But until then, we are compensated with the delightful misadventures of Twisted Fate and Graves' idiot husbands putting their 1.5 combined brain cells together to try and take down Sarah Fortune, a woman who's substantially smarter and more competent than 10 of them would be put together. Which is a good lot of fun because we get pirate action and like idiots haggling over the price of a bounty, getting thrown into a crate, and then nearly getting sacrificed to an evil demon serpent god. Which, as it turns out, is a little bit of a repeat of history, because Twisted Fate and Graves have recently actually been almost sacrificed to an evil demon serpent god with tentacles, I guess, in a story on the universe called Destiny and Fate. Graves and Twisted Fate are contracted by one of the pirate lords-ish of Bilgewater to find a magical artifact called the Abyssal Crown that will theoretically allow anyone who wears it to control the sea beasts down below and thereby control Bilgewater. They managed to get a hold of the crown after angering, very, very angering, an old sea witch who is intending to sacrifice them to some of the monsters down below, and they managed to get the crown and get away. But the sea witch follows them to Bilgewater, where she contracts Misfortune to capture the two thieving rats, as she calls them, in return for the return of one of Misfortune's own men, who has also been captured by this sea witch. And that is where the action picks up in this particular animated short, with Misfortune successfully pulling off the job, and then immediately double-crossing the sea witch as well, because, well, this is Bilgewater, and she has a certain fondness for Tobias and dear old Graves. So anyway, the basics. This is yet another Studio Access production, like all of the other Tales of Runeterra shorts, and this seems to be the one that has gotten the most reaction generally from people on social media. Certainly people that I follow seem to have the most enthusiasm for this one. Now, I'll probably still say that the Piltover and Zaun short is my favorite, because it has all that lovely character animation on Jinx and that lovely comic timing, but certainly the frenemy dynamic between Twisted Fate, Graves, and Misfortune certainly charmed me as well, and there's a lot of good character animation here to talk about. But we'll start at the beginning, which is that I'm not using the YouTube media player this time around. Normally, I'll just load these things up on YouTube and then I'll go through them, because most modern media players have a little bit of a design quirk in that they will usually have a thing that will allow you to do step forward in a video file, but a whole hell of a lot of modern media players, certainly all the ones I had, did not have a feature to allow you to step backwards. And I was today years old when I realized that you can hold down the control key and use the arrow keys to step forward and backwards in Media Player Classics. So that's lovely to know. This is good. Makes things a lot easier. Wish I'd known that sooner. Anyway, we start this short in a similar manner to all the other Tales of Runeterra shorts. As you may remember from those animation breakdowns, all of the Tales of Runeterra shorts so far have opened on a static, two-dimensional, illustration shot of some part of Runeterra, and then there's a title card down below that says, oh, this is this place in that location in Runeterra. And usually there'll be 2D illustrations with a bit of parallax effect scrolling going on them. Here we get something just a tiny little bit different. We start on a panning shot, which is to say, we open on this lighthouse-looking thing here, and then we get a shot that pans all the way down past, like, the various cliffs and valleys of Bilgewater's construction, down to Magragan's Killhouse, which is in Bilgewater. Here we get the same, like, the usual title card that we got in all the other ones, but hey, tiny little bit of difference between this one and the other ones. It doesn't do a lot in terms of differentiating it from the other Tales of Runeterra shorts, except that it gives us a slightly better idea of the kind of geography that Bilgewater has as a whole. As you may remember if you looked at a lot of the concept art, Bilgewater is basically arranged in kind of a Piltover and Zaun-ish arrangement, where the lower classes of Bilgewater, all like the bilge rats and the people hanging out on the docks, they tend to be down in the very lower depths of Bilgewater, down near the docks, down near the water in shanty towns that are sort of established down there, whereas pirate lords and the great and the good and the powerful tend to have houses usually built out of overturned ships, as you can see over here in the background, way up high, up in the clouds, up above the city. So there's this class dynamic, and so what this panning shot does is it gives us a pretty good sense of like the verticality of Bilgewater, is that it's a town that has these like very tall peaks here and there, and then these really deep valleys where all the, scum tends to hang out near the bottom. And we get a couple of more establishing shots, interestingly, which is, again, something that the other Tales of Runeterra shorts really didn't do, which, like, this is a shot that's just kind of lingering on a fishhook, and then panning across some barrels with some distressingly alive tentacles kind of wriggling out of it. All of it doing a great job of setting the mood. And part of that is because, well, we don't really begin in the middle of the action here in the same way. Like, for example, the Freljord short is like, we get a short establishing shot, the village is on fire, and then we're straight into fighting. Like, then it's pretty much straight into combat. Here, the situation is a little bit different, because what the story starts out with is a quiet moment. This is like Misfortune sitting at a desk, shuffling together some cards, and hey, wouldn't you know it, there's a bit of magic in those cards. Hey, I wonder who has magic cards in the League of Legends universe. Oh, hey, she's got Twisted Fate strung up by his leg. So it's this quiet moment of characters just kind of, well, they're hanging out, basically. Like, in Twisted Fate's case, he's literally hanging out and talking to each other and just, like, playfully ribbing each other a little bit, like having charming pirate dialogue between scoundrels of the sort that you're used to seeing in these kinds of movies and comics. And establishing a little bit of, well, our third character who's about to, somebody gently make his entrance. So these quiet moments, like these panning shots, this sort of contemplative, brief moment, it's all in service of, like, maintaining that casual, quiet, sort of calm, hey, we're just frenemies hanging out, talking business, talking shop, everyone's cool. Like, Twisted Fate is not in immediate danger of being murdered by Misfortune, right? Which is what you might get if you had a much more frantic intro or introduction. You might get the sense that he's under immediate threat, but he really isn't, because Misfortune doesn't want him dead. She just wants to use him as bait to lure his partner, which, of course, she successfully does, because Graves is dumb as a bag of rocks. That's one of the best things about him. Which leads us into the hero of the hour, Malcolm Graves, making his entrance, and then we get this lovely shot. And there's two lovely things about it. Like, he steps into the room and steps just short of the trap that Misfortune placed for him, which shows two things. First of all, that Misfortune was able to completely accurately predict what he would do, and also that the only way that he wasn't captured in this moment was sheer dumb luck, as Twisted Fate is going to be about to point out. But it also, I love the implication that the way she captured Twisted Fate was exactly this. Like, she just made him walk into a room and knew that he'd be stupid enough to step in a trap for him. Which, I kind of like that as a dynamic between Twisted Fate and Graves, is that they're both, like, exactly the same kind of stupid. Like, one of the interesting things that happens in this short is some of the rhetoric of combat in animation, especially in animated media that is meant for children as well, because this is a gunfight between a dude who has a giant double-barreled shotgun and a lady who has, like, a musket, which apparently has a magazine and doesn't need to be reloaded, which is very cool, but also it has, like, a barrel like the size of an apple. Like, this is like very large bullets come out of that thing. And that presents a problem when it comes to animation, because you have a gunfight here between Sarah Fortune, who's one of the finest marksmen in all of Bilgewater, and Graves, who is a pretty good shot himself and who has, like I said, a giant-ass double-barreled shotgun. But nobody ever hits each other, like, ever, at all, with anything at any point, despite, like, these being good marksmen with, like, pretty clear shots at each other who somehow don't hit. Now, for Misfortune, there's the excuse that she needs them alive. Like, she's been hired to take them in alive so they can be sacrificed to the beasts below by the Sea Witch, so she doesn't actually want to hit Graves. She just wants to lure him into a trap, which, of course, she successfully manages to do. But Graves, on the other hand, is like, no, he wants her dead right now because she has his partner. And, like, you can maybe argue that he's trying to get the bounty for her, but just so you know, the bounty for Misfortune is good, dead, or alive. But it is one of the problems of combat rhetoric in children-friendly media, and it's especially a problem when you have a set of guns like the highly stylized, exaggerated ones we have in Bilgewater, because, like, there's no plausible way for someone to get hit with a shot from one of those and, like, not turning into a fine spray of red mist in the room. Like, an exit wound from anything fired from those weapons is gonna be, like, big. It's gonna be a lot of blood and gore, and you kind of just can't get away with that for two reasons. First of all, because, like, there's rating standards and blah, 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 all that distressingly annoying stuff, but also because this is meant to be children's friendly media. Like, it is meant to be extremely friendly to all audiences at all times. So you can't do blood. But then, how do you do combat? And it leaves gunfights in animation like this in kind of the same space that sword fights used to be in old movies. You have Errol Flynn dueling someone with a sword, and someone at some point has to get stabbed or killed, surely, but you can't, like, have them flailing at each other with weapons, drawing blood over and over again and opening up wounds, so the sword fight has to become something else. Rather than a deadly struggle between people who are trying to kill each other, it becomes sort of a dance routine. It becomes more of an expression of an underlying idea. Specifically, the combat becomes an expression of the conflict between the characters. This is something kung fu movies perfected, using, like, the combat sequences of characters doing really complicated fighting moves, not so much as actually them, like, fighting each other in a realistic way, but as a means to express the conflict between the characters. And that's very much what's happening here. And that's to me, at least, that's a useful lens through which to interpret gunfights like the ones we see here, when you have this question of, like, but they're not hitting each other, like, ever. They don't even seem to be trying, really, to hit each other. They just seem to be aiming next to each other all the time. But that's because it's not really a gunfight. It's a ballet. It's a dance. It's a choreography. And it's not about expressing we want to kill each other. It's about expressing the conflict between the characters, specifically the way that you can see here, that Misfortune is trying to deal with Graves, but she has one little handgun, he has a giant-ass shotgun, and he has a friend that he's trying to save, so instantly she's under pressure. Like, she raises the gun, she starts firing at him, gets behind the table for cover, boom, boom. There's your cover, little lady. That's gone now. So she's under pressure immediately, and then she makes the decision, okay, I need to get that card. But Graves is like, I have a big gun, therefore, nope. And so Misfortune is driven back again, forced to run up the stairs and retreat. And that's the rhetoric. Like, that's what the gunfight here is trying to express, not actual, like, bloody-minded violence with the aim of killing anyone. As you can see there, Graves has, like, the clearest shot that anyone could ever possibly hope to have, and somehow still manages to miss. And then Twisted Fate comes up behind her, puts a gun to her head, gunfight is over, they win because they overpower her. Like, that's the rhetoric of the gunfight, which of course is all Misfortune just setting them up to take a literal fall because she's been planning all this out ahead of time because she's smarter than them, which is one of the wonderful things about her. Anyway, that was an extended tangent about gunfights that I wasn't really planning on going on. So anyway, let's get back to the actual character animation, starting with Miss Sarah Fortune doing a little deck shuffling thing. Now, this is always like a lovely little showcase for animators because shuffling a deck is actually kind of a deceptively complex thing to do with your hands, in the sense that if you take a look at her hands right now, the deck has to be bent because there has to be this tension build up that can then be released into the when you, like, flick the decks together, when you shuffle the decks together, which means the hand has to be in a position where it's applying pressure but also holding the cards upwards at the same time, which is it's just a position of a lot of tension. You can see her fingers spread out really widely to do that, and that's, like, that actually takes kind of a lot of puppeteering and manipulation to get right, like, to make that look more or less correct. Even in 3D animation, where you have an animation rig where like the hand is pre-modeled for you and you don't have to do it all in terms of 2D animation, it's actually kind of a difficult thing to do. And I just thought that was neat. Like look at the subtle little motions of her fingers there. Like when she finishes flicking the decks together, look how her thumb on that hand there, whoop, slides out a little bit because the cards, like the thing that she's holding tension against, is gone now. So the thumb's relaxed like that. And then this finger right here, like that little spider leg step it takes out, sort of hanging out there while she uses like the 3 other fingers on her hand to shuffle the decks together. And then the hands have to do the acting for her, because one of the cards does a magic thing that she's not expecting to have happen. And so see her reaction, like there. We don't have her face, we don't really have much of her body, we just basically get like a little bit of her torso. So in order to communicate Miss Fortune's reaction to the magic, all of that acting has to be done by the hands, pretty much exclusively. Like there. So you get that little motion of surprise that it doesn't really translate into her body. Like her body doesn't flinch at the flames coming off the card. It's just her hands that are doing the communication of that, where you can see like she shuffles them together. By the way, obviously hand animated flame effects, which is lovely. And animated mostly on 1s, and then with a little bit of animation on 2s as they slow down at the end. But you can see that, like, it's that, oh, that thing did a thing I was not expecting it to. You get that whole feeling that that's her state of mind when she sees the cards do that. It's like, oh. But you get that just from the way her hands recoil from the deck when the fire comes on. And then, of course, we get to actually see her face. And some really cool visual effects on the cards that we'll look at in a second as well. And here, like, there's some really excellent facial animation in this short, just in general. As usual, pay attention to the eyes. Like, the little gestures with the eyes are, for me, always the best part of character animation, is because you can do so much to communicate a person's state of mind just by how their eyes are flickering. But then there's also the card, like with this lovely little, a 3D effect-ish. Basically, the card seems to have internal dimensions. It acts like almost a little window into another world, kind of like lenticular 3D cards, but like even cooler, because it seems to work from any viewing angle, where the card inside has a space all on its own that is filled with magic, which I think is just a really cool way to let the audience know immediately. First of all, that we get the fire effect on the cards as she shovels them together, which tells us, okay, something magical is special about these cards. And then we get this cool-ass looking visual effect telling us, okay, the cards are magic, got it. She's got a hold of them. I'm holding all the cards now, with the voice line re-emphasizing that, telling us, okay, the cards are magic and important and special, and as Twisted Fate pulls one out that does magic glowy bits while he's pulling it out with his hands, he literally has an ace up his sleeve. We understand in no uncertain terms, without anyone ever saying, aha, Twisted Fate, I have your deck of magical cards which power all of your magical abilities. No, we get that. It's clearly communicated. Nobody needs to spend time expositing it because we've been shown rather than told it. And further, a little bit of communication that the moment Twisted Fate lets go of the card, it stops glowing, which tells us, okay, so this is magic that specifically responds to Twisted Fate, which means Miss Fortune probably can't just, like, pick up the magic cards and throw them around and use them. And, like, they react to her there, mostly by accident, not because she knows how to do anything with them. And a lovely little effect here is, like, Twisted Fate is here immediately. Like, the moment the camera pans up from the cards, Twisted Fate is in the frame, but we're not supposed to really see him yet. We're not supposed to know who he is or what's going on exactly. So they just cover him up. They just have Miss Fortune's hand be, like, right in front of him until she's ready for, like, until the scene is ready for the camera to focus on him instead, which is what it does. She slides out of focus, he slides into focus, and we understand immediately, okay, these are his cards, she has got him prisoner, and here's where I really wish I could rotate this stuff. I can do that in Premiere. Future Skyne, would you please rotate this so that people can see Twisted Fate the right side up? Thank you. And here's where we get Twisted Fate himself, just hanging out, chatting with his favorite friend, Miss Sarah Fortune. Absolutely nothing bad going on here. And the comedy of the scene, of course, is derived from the fact that Twisted Fate is clearly in a very precarious situation, but they're talking like they're old friends, just like having tea or dinner or drinks together. It's a very understated communication on his face here. Like, the facial animation is, like, very calm, very collected. He doesn't flail with his arms. He doesn't really make any gestures. It's really just the mouth, the eyebrows, and the eyes doing all the movement here, which is partly because, well, from the perspective of anyone watching the actual short, Twisted Fate is upside down. But also because that's his mood, is like he's kind of, yeah, well, I'm just hanging out here waiting for graves. That's really all I'm doing, is just waiting for my boyfriend to bail me out of another sticky situation. And you can kind of tell that from like that easy smirk on his face, that he's pretty confident that he'll be able to walk away from this one. Or that's just him putting on like a gambler's confident poker face. Either or, it's communicated fairly well through the animation. And then again, the trick of camera focus being used here, where as we're looking at Twisted Fate slowly getting ready to pull his ace out of his sleeves, the focus is on him and his hands, but as Miss Fortune stands up and Twisted Fate lets go of his cards, camera's focus shifts so that we're looking at her and her motion rather than focusing on the cards. And by the way, she's got some cool pants, doesn't she? Those look rad as hell. And again, love the character animation on Miss Fortune. Look at that. Like, she's walking up to him, she's not even looking at him, she's looking away. And look at the gestures of the mouth as she's talking. Like that little pout she's got going on, which, like, again, reinforces her flirty confidence that she constantly carries whenever she's dealing with these men. She does it with an easy, flirty confidence that she only really drops the moment she knows that they're not looking, as we shall see when she is cornered by Twisted Fate and Graves here. Like there, that little shift right there. She goes from being in this combative mood, you can kind of tell from her expression, like this angry expression, hands up and kind of, well, god damn it. And then look how her hips shift. There. That little shift of the hips, that little throw of the hair, that little cock of the head. She's completely in flirty mode. I'm harmless. I'm just a woman. I couldn't possibly do anything to deal with you big, strong men who have me cornered. And Twisted Fate and Graves, being stupid idiots, immediately fall for it and start to bicker over who gets to take the price. And the moment she's confident that they're not looking anymore, ugh. Like, her true feelings come out a little bit, where it's like, men. Like, you just kind of get that, like, which is lovely. But we'll get to that in time. For the moment, we are dealing with Miss Fortune talking to upside-down Twisted Fate. And the gestures on the mouth here are so good. Because, like, when you're dealing with animation for talking, when you're animating a character saying something, there's the lip sync, of course. Like, you have to have the mouth make the correct movements to produce the sounds that you need in the language that you're animating for. But there's also gesture that you can do with the mouth, like with the way that a character might, like, draw their jaw to the left side or the right to kind of give them a pout in one direction, have the lips push out a little bit further to give kind of a kissy face expression, which also can help make a character seem more fun. Look at the way Miss Fortune approaches Twisted Fate here, and think to yourself, like, what kind of person speaks that way? What kind of person uses, like, their gestures and their body language that way? And you get an accurate impression, not necessarily of who Miss Fortune is, but who Miss Fortune wants Twisted Fate to see her as in this moment. Because she does this whole, like, aw, Twisted Fate, you look so cute hanging upside down there. I could just pinch your little cheeks. All of which is an act that she's putting on, which we see in multiple other bits of media related to Miss Fortune. Is she has that act down pat, especially in the comic that was released for her a little while back. I remember, like, that specifically revolved around her putting on the helpless damsel act to fool someone into giving her what she wants. Like, when she's about to poke him on the nose, look what she does with her body. She leans in, like, she leans forward into him, and there's this little Like that right there. That's the kind of mouth gesture that I'm talking about there, where it's like, it's almost like she's doing kissy face at him, right? Like that's what gives it that flirty energy, is that she has that little kissy face lips thing going on. Poop. As she pokes him on the nose. The sense of their interaction is that Twisted Fate isn't really flirting back at her as such. Like he seems to understand on some level that part of what she's doing is putting on an act, and you kind of get that from his like, yeah, I'm playing along kind of mood that he's got, especially that little grin he does, like there. When he pokes her on the nose, he's like, funny joke, but I know you don't mean it. So taking a look at Twisted Fate again, like because Twisted Fate is upside down, there's a limit to how much gesturing you can really have him do. Like he's supposed to look helpless. He is disarmed. Like he has his arms free, but he is supposed to be helpless in this scene. So if you have him flailing around or doing too much stuff, it would also contribute to the feeling that he has a lot more agency in the situation that he does. So I think that's part of the reason why they're keeping him immobile. And also because he, much like Sarah Misfortune is trying to lure him into a false sense of security, he's trying to lure her into a false sense of security so that he can do something when Graves shows up, which indeed is what he tries to do here. As she raises her gun, you can see he's grabbing for her, like he was waiting for a moment when he could maybe try and get that gun away from her, which is part of the reason why he's being so passive here, is to get her used to the idea that he's not gonna move. And I do love, like, when Twisted Fate's so confidently saying, Graves isn't stupid enough to walk through this door, right? In just a second, kicking it down and shouting very loudly. He wouldn't be stupid enough to do that. Take a look at the way he gestures with his jaw. There, that gesture right there, like he raises his jaw, which is hard to see because he's upside down, but he does that little push forward. There, like, there's no way he'd be stupid enough to do that, or that push forward with the jaw, like that assertive, like, absolutely no way. It's no way he's gonna do it. It's never gonna happen. This is literally, oh no, there he is. He's bursting through the door right now, actually. It sells the comedy. It's more funny if Twisted Fate gets agitated and like, my husband would never be dumb enough to fall for this trap. Oh, he just fell for the trap. Okay, I see. This is also a lovely composition, by the way. I really like having the fish head and like the window with the glow right in the middle between the two of them, and then that symmetry of these two hooks being on either side of the room, like in the exact same position. And it also creates that Mexican standoff feeling a little bit, where the characters are like eyeing each other up. This is another time when Misfortune lets the mask slip a little bit. When she realizes that Graves has avoided the trap on sheer dumb luck, she gets this damn it, and then Twisted Fate is like, well, dumb luck is a gift of his. And then look at her, how she responds. Like that. Look at that sneer. Like her lip just curls into... Like, you can see she's really like, she's frustrated. It was supposed to be easy, right? And then he has to go and make it complicated because, well, this is Bilgewater. And again, look at the eye gesture. Because, like, as Graves avoids the trap, she's looking at the rope. Like, you can see that. Like, she's like, damn it, that was supposed to work. And then Twisted Fate starts talking to her, and you can see her gaze shifts from the rope to looking at Graves. And you can also see that her head position, it's not just that she looks down to look at Graves, it's that her head tilts forward. Like her jaw goes down, her head tilts forward, and that's the universal body posture of someone who's getting ready to take action. That's the universal body posture of, like, the predator eyeing down their prey. It's, like, look at the difference. Like, here she looks like, well, that's a problem. And here, she looks like, guess I have to find another way to kill everyone. Like, you get that much more, that sense of determination. And then she responds to Twisted Fate, and look at the eye gesture. Like, she inclines her head towards him a little bit. Like, you can see she turns her head lightly in towards him and goes, eh. And then, only for a brief moment, for the briefest second, does she take her eyes off Graves to look at Twisted Fate while she taunts him. and then immediately back to Graves again. And you can see the look on Twisted Fate's face when she brings up her gun. Like, here he's got this easy, confident smile while he's looking at his lovely idiot husband. And then he sees the gun, and he's like, oh, no, my idiot husband! And he tries to get it from her with absolutely no success. And once again, obviously, bam, hand-animated smoke, hand-animated fire. And there's a couple of interesting things going on with the hand animation here, in that you see we get this initial flash, and then you get this burst of orange kind of streaking off screen. Right, so they don't just animate the flash of the gun, but also like the trail of fire following the bullets. And I think that looks really good. Like, I think it really gives the sense of this being like a pistol that shoots a bullet the size of a grapefruit, you know? Poof. You really get that oomph, that punch to the bullets when you get the effects flying off that same way. And it's a different thing, rather, with Graves' gun, Destiny. That's what the gun is called. Because here you can see, like, you get the big burst of smoke, but not really that sense of an orange streak flying out of the gun itself in the same way that Misfortune's guns do. Unlike Twisted Fate, Graves never has an expression of fear at any point. Ever. There's just this grim determination all the time, which again, it's the difference between the two, is that Twisted Fate has a tendency to more openly show vulnerable emotions, and Graves is much more like, I'm a grumpy old man. He has this grumpy energy all the time. Grumpy and determined. Like, you can see it here, like, his reaction to getting shot at is just to get mad. Whereas Misfortune's reaction to getting shot at is, well, I don't want to get shot at. So let's talk for a second about momentum, specifically as it relates to Twisted Fate himself. See here, he's trying to get the card, and he's really close. He's so close. When Misfortune steps on him, she gives him the kick. And there's an interesting thing going on with the way that Twisted Fate has to swing here, because he's not just hanging by his leg, he's hanging by a very long rope that is attached to his leg. So when he gets kicked, the initial inertia hits his body and pushes him backwards, but that inertia, like that movement has to travel up the rope in a wave before the rope up at the top will then snap forward and start moving in the rail that he's clearly being pushed down. So you see this, like, the swinging motion that he's got is like, rather than being this like linear action where she kicks him and then he moves, it's more like she kicks him, and then you can see that counter swing that comes in, like there, like, you see how that's the initial force, right? He gets kicked, and then we have the initial force which pushes him that direction, and then you can see the wave of inertia traveling back down the rope and giving him this snap, swinging him back in the other direction. We don't get to see the rope, but the animator still has in mind when they're doing the animation that, oh, hey, I need to keep in mind, like, how is he suspended from the ceiling? How should he move if he's attached to a very long rope that runs on a railing up top? And there's also the other little detail: as Twisted Fate is reaching out for the card, it starts to glow. Like, right as he gets close. And then as he gets kicked, you can see it happening twice, actually. The glow goes away, and then the glow is there, and then the glow goes away again. I really like the design of these cards. Like, I wish that's what the cards looked like in-game, because that's really cool. You can even see that it's a teleportation card, because it's got the eye on the thing, which is what happens when you use his ultimate, is that you get vision on enemies, and then you have the multiple fading people, like, as though they're being spirited away, as though they're being teleported, which is very cool. And I do like this framing. I really like the framing of, like, Misfortune has kicked him away and she's about to pick up the card. And you can see her, like, here she's looking down at the card, right? And then Graves raises his arm to fire, and that's when she looks up at him. So there's this transition moment when his arm passes her face, where her expression changes, which I just thought was funny. And I also really like the framing of seeing her over Graves' shoulder. So kind of seeing her from his perspective at that moment. There's a really cool camera movement here Because, like, here, we're seeing things from Graves' perspective, both when he's firing at Misfortune and as he's looking at Twisted Fate dangling out over the pit of water there. And then, as his perspective changes, as he turns to actually duck out from cover and fire at Misfortune, look how the camera swings around with him. And it almost has a slight video gamey feeling. Like, it's a little bit like you're playing Gears of War, and you're hunkering down behind cover, and then you swing out to take a shot. And it's got such a nicely dynamic feeling, because the whole room is basically pivoting around Graves as he twists into the motion that he needs to take a shot at her. And there's also the other little details, like when he fires, look at her up on the balcony. She does react. Like, you can see she flinches away from it. Even though, like, she's so out of focus, you didn't really need to do that as such. Like, I don't think anyone would have noticed if you didn't. And still it's there, and you can see her, like, she's still moving in that flinch as she comes out to fire another couple shots here. And I like the handheld camera effect here, because that's not present in a lot of what goes on here. Like, when we are in the scenes, when it's just Twisted Fate and Misfortune talking, the camera is completely still. Like, there's no camera movements whatsoever. It just kind of sits there, pointing in one direction, and letting the characters do character interaction on the thing. But then once the action begins, you can even see it here, like, as the camera zooms in on Graves. Anytime. There. As he does his whole "somebody once told me" here, you can see all of a sudden the camera starts moving. It gets this handheld effect applied to it almost immediately. And then, once there's no action happening on screen anymore, static shot once again. Completely still camera, because in order for this shot to work, you can't have the camera being, like, messing around like it's in a Michael Bay movie. It has to be still, it has to be stayed, it has to be staged almost like a, what's his face? The dude who does symmetrical things, but, like, it has that particular stillness and symmetry, and it's the same thing here. As Misfortune and Twisted Fate are talking, nothing. But then, as we cut to the action actually beginning, the camera begins to move. The camera begins to swing into action, so we get this pan over as she throws down the thing, and then, as she shoots at Graves, the bullet is being followed by the camera almost. You can see that happening, right there. Like, when she fires, you can see how the camera kind of swings. You get this motion of the camera from left to right, and then it kind of completes that as we look at Graves. And here we get this handheld shaky cam effect completely to communicate the impact of the bullets that are being fired. But even once the bullet has stopped being fired, you still have this handheld effect that then follow Graves' gun as he points it as Misfortune and fires. And as we get down here with Misfortune again, you can see the camera, there's still that constant wobbling, as though it's a cameraman on their hands and knees with a camcorder trying to catch the action. And I really like this transition, because this is a cut. This is a cut to a different shot, actually. Remember, the backgrounds in these animated shorts are usually 2D illustrations. Probably they model some of it in 3D, especially during camera moves like this one to give them some freedom. But this is a cut, and I think they're cutting from one background illustration to another one, besides just cutting to Twisted Fate, and they mask it by having it happen as Graves' bullet blasts the table apart and the shrapnel flies. The camera follows the shrapnel and then pans over to Twisted Fate, or turns over to Twisted Fate, and then follows his card as it lands on the ground. And that handheld camera effect basically persists for most of the action scene. You can see it even here, like in the quieter moments when there are no bullets flying. And it doesn't really stop until... yeah, pretty much until... yeah, there, more or less. Like, there, once Twisted Fate has her at gunpoint, that's when the camera sort of slows down, and then we get back to these stayed, still, calm positions, just showing the interactions between the characters, because now, once again, it's not about action anymore, it's not about kinetic dynamism, it's about character interaction. It's about these two morons starting immediately to hackle over who gets her bounty, instead of keeping their eyes on the most dangerous pirate in Bilgewater. They're so dumb, I love it. There's this lovely animation. And I really like that. I really like the... Like, that little loping... Like, you see, like, Graves, he's kind of shuffling across the ground. You can even see that in the way that he runs. Is like, he's not running at a sprint. He's kind of hunched over. He's carrying that big shotgun, after all. But also, like, trying to keep a low profile. Literally a low profile. And then you can see that little... He steps in on that leg. And then that one comes over here to support his weight as he's bending down. And you can see they're cheating a little bit here. Because Graves doesn't actually grab the card. You see that? The card is just like... It's just rendered on the ground. And Graves kind of clips behind it instead of one of his fingers going over it. Doesn't matter, because when you see it in motion, you don't notice that at all. And I wonder why that is, actually. Is that because... Well, no, they must have composited it into the scene as a 3D object. They can't have hand animated it. No, there's absolutely no way. I wonder why that is. That might just be a small animation mistake, but it's the kind of animation mistake that, like I said, it doesn't matter because you don't see it. Like, when you see it in motion, you don't notice that at all. You only notice it if you're a weirdo like me who goes frame by frame through these things. Anyway, the thing I wanted to say is that I really like that little gesture, like that little movement of, like, you can see he stops for just a second on one leg there. His momentum stops for just a moment, and then you can see he leans forward, like he leans all of his body weight forward as he picks up the card to take the next step off of this leg, pushing himself forward, like continuing that sort of hunched over run while under fire from misfortune. And then that other, like he takes this little hop forward, and then that little stop, throw the card, and keep moving. And it has such a nice rhythm to it. Like, I really love the rhythm of these shots. Like that, whoosh, and then... Because there's that little... It's such a tiny moment, but there's that tiny little moment of when he throws the card. He moves just a little slower for a second. And then he runs off. Yeah, it's a 3D object. It has to be. And I like Twisted Fate's change in... demeanor. Like, remember, in the scene so far, he's been disempowered. He's had no control over anything that's happening because he's a prisoner, and he doesn't have his cards, he doesn't have anything. But now, as the magic is returning to him, like, he strikes a pose. Like, he immediately switches into confident combat gambler mode with his, like, this grin on his face, and, like, he rears his arm back and stretches out the hand and does this little finger pose with the card. And then here, let's see, this lighting effect here, like the blue light here is hand animated in 2D, but the cards themselves, like the cards that kind of float around him for a second, I believe those are 3D objects. And then we shift back into, I think here, we shift back into 2D animation as we get this beautiful flash frame. Like, these flash frames are so gorgeous. And then, of course, more, as you can see, 2D animation seems to be animated on 2s, as we've talked about a billion times before. It's even become a meme in the comments at this point about animating on 2s. Like, I know I say it a lot, but it's because it's what's happening. It's what's happening. How else would I describe it? And again, that same little camera focus trick, where right now, after he's teleported, first the focus is on Misfortune, because we need to see her realizing that he's gone, and then she fades out of focus as the little bit of rope dangling in the air comes into focus instead. Smoke and magic effects all hand animated, as far as I can tell. And now we get, remember that shot we had of Graves when he, like, dives out of cover to go after Misfortune, that over-the-shoulder shot? We've got one from her perspective now, and it's because the perspective of the battle has shifted. Because previously during the fight, except for... I think pretty much the shot when Misfortune is behind the table. Yeah, this one. That's pretty much the only shot of the fight that we get from her perspective, and then from there on, it's all the Graves and Twisted Fate shows, but especially Graves. It's his perspective that we're looking at Misfortune from. It's his perspective that we're looking at Twisted Fate from. And she's always like the one on the run and retreating, and that's because, in terms of the storytelling here, at this point, we're supposed to root for Graves. At this point, we're like, Graves has come to save his partner. He's gonna drive off the scheming pirate lady and save his dude. Not that he's like the good guy, morally speaking, but he's like the protagonist of the action as it happens right now. And then once we get to, they turn the tables on her, she's the underdog. All of a sudden, we get shots much more from her perspective. We get this over-the-shoulder shot from her perspective as she realizes Twisted Fate is gone. And as she realizes Graves is closing in on her. And then we're in her perspective as Twisted Fate appears behind her, puts the gun to her head. And then we get her perspective on Graves coming up the stairs, pushing her back. And that little shift in perspective also shifts our sympathies a little bit, I think. It makes you feel a little bit less like, oh, she's just the villain, to, oh, whoa, she's in trouble, actually. She's the cool pirate lady. I don't want her to get hurt. Which, of course, she isn't gonna. And now we get back to this lovely bit of character. I can't get over how cool that little simple shift is. Like how she goes from, you can see here, she's stepping backwards, but you kind of get the sense that she's still looking for, like, is one of them gonna come close enough for me to grab the gun or something? Being pushed backwards into the wall, and then... Okay, well, like that little... Like here, all defiant and all, oh, you won't get away with this, and then... Okay, well... Fair and square, gentlemen, you beat me. Tee. Like that, and it's that little shift of the hips that does it. That's the one that really sells. That she's dropping into flirty mode again. Like she's dropping out of combat mode and back into flirty mode. And it's that little twist of the hips and that little toss of the hair. Like that little whoop. Like that little, you see how she twists her head there just a little bit upwards. And then she's in full flirty mode, right? Like with the big green eyes and the eyelashes and oh, I'm so pretty you wouldn't want to hurt me, would you? Which is a very different, again, with the gestures of the eyes. Like this right here, predator eyes. Those are eyes that are looking for an opportunity to kill. And then up comes the eyebrows. And what? Suddenly it's bedroom eyes. All of a sudden it's flirty eyes. All of a sudden it's like nice mascara and like big green pretty eyes that wouldn't hurt a fly. It's embarrassing how quickly it works. Who gets my bounty? Well, we split it 50-50. Now hold on! Actually, why am I doing the voice acting? I should let them do the voice acting. They're really good.
Missy Fortune, nice and easy.
Don't make any more trouble.
Okay, you win. So who gets to collect my bounty?
Well, by arrangement, we always split 50-50.
Nah, hold up, 70-30.
What are you talking about?
They're so stupid. It's so good. And Graves just can't resist immediately haggling over the price. Like, you should have tied her up first at least. Like, my God. And you can see that attitude that they have towards each other. Like, because when she asks who gets the bounty, well, Twisted Fate says, oh, 50-50. And look at his body gesture, right? Like he does this little, like he kind of nods his head upwards and has this sort of magnanimous, oh, well, we split it 50-50. You can even see he does a gesture with his hand in his shadow. Like there. Like raising up a hand towards Graves. And then look at Graves' response. It's a complete opposite acting. Like, where Twisted Fate is all, like, up and, like, chin up and head up and, like, this cheerful attitude. And then Graves responds with, like, down low. Like, you can see he's immediately leaning forward, down low, shoulders up, head tilted forward rather than backwards. And you get the contrast between their character acting is part of, like, is part of their dynamic. It's part of why they work so well as a bickering married couple, is because they have this... And you can see, like... like, once he realizes that the Graves wants to have a fight about it, Twisted Fate copies his energy immediately. It's like, ah! Oh, look at these dumb idiots. Like, look, Graves with, like, the poke. I just saved you. And then Twisted Fate is like, don't poke me. Slapping his hand away. It's so good. And the little eye roll, like the little one, it's there. Here it comes. Yeah, that little gesture from Twisted Fate, right? He slaps the hand away and Graves just keeps going. He's like, not now, honey. And I just love this the switch in energy of Twisted, like this easy, leisurely, well, we split it 50-50. And then Graves immediately like, what do you mean 50-50? Now hold up. It's so good. They match each other so well. Like, that's the thing is like Twisted Fate brings one energy to the conversation. Leisurely, laid back, magnanimous, let's split it 50-50. Graves brings a completely different energy. He wants to butt heads, he wants to fight, and the moment Twisted Fate realizes that, now? Of all times, now? What do you mean? And he immediately copies Graves, he mirrors him. And the thing to look out for is the gun. Like Twisted Fate's gun, the distraction is almost working, and then Graves pokes him, and now the gun isn't on Misfortune anymore. He has lowered it. He's completely entwined with his argument with his partner right now, rather than looking at the dangerous pirate lady that they're just trying to capture. Which is when Misfortune drops the facade. Man, the expressions are good in this one. Because you can see... Like, you see, that again, that little eye gesture, that little twitch of the eye right there. That tells you that she's, like, looking at one, looking at the other. Well, they seem suitably distracted. And it's that subtle, slow little... Like, she goes from this wide, pleasant smile, and then slowly starts to fade. Just gently fades. And then... Like, this is the moment when she realizes that she's safe. You can see her body posture relaxes. Her entire... Like, her hands aren't raised quite as high anymore. Her shoulders come down. It's like, well... They're so dumb. I love them. Now, where does Graves' gun go? Oh, right, it comes down. Because they can't help do another little Looney Tunes thing. Like, they fall, whoop, and then and then their guns come down. Bonk. And then we get this shot, right? This one is a little awkward to me in terms of animation, because what's going on here is being delivered by the voiceover. Like, it's Graves and Twisted Fate going, get your hand out of my thing, get your elbow out of my mouth. That is not my elbow. They're doing that, and that's kind of supposed to carry the scene, but the visual is like, we're inside the box looking up at the lid that's about to open when the horrifying priestess shows up. I would have liked for, like, the crate to, like, shift or rattle itself, like, a little bit, like they're fighting with each other for room in there and trying to get out of each other's hair. Like, that kind of feeling. But because it's so static and like, I can't even tell the difference between when I'm pressing play or pressing pause. But there we get the priestess. And I like the detail that her eyes, like what little of her pupils remain, is just pointing in completely different directions. She's not looking at them. Something else is. And that's like, you get the reveal of her eyes, as it were. Just her eyes. And then it stops. And you can see, well, that looks like a lady who's super blind. And then you get the actual eye, the actual thing that sees, the thing that looks, which is this little tentacle thing on her head, which, And again, Misfortune isn't dealing with any stupid men anymore, so she completely drops all of that flirty, sort of pleasantness that she has, and it's all business face all the time. And one thing I like about the priestess is that she doesn't have lip syncing. Like, she doesn't move her lips, she doesn't speak, because it's not her talking. Something else is talking through her. So all she really does is open her mouth, and then words come out. But she doesn't say anything with her lips as such. Which, again, is that thing about, like, what can you communicate about a character just by the way that they talk? For example, you can communicate that someone is possessed by something horrifying and terrible by not having them lip sync at all, by just having their mouth kind of while obvious words come out of it nonetheless. And so, again, magic effects as usual. Hand animated. Both the smoke coming out of the eye of the idol thing that she's using here, and this twirling, rotating bubble of whatever the hell it is. And this is Misfortune's quartermaster, I believe. And again, look at the shift in misfortunes. Like, she goes from all business all the time to, oh, here's someone I actually care about. Like, here's someone towards whom I have some level of tender feelings, if nothing else, like, just as a crewmate. Or as a quartermaster, which, like, by the way, quartermasters on ships, every bit as powerful as the captain. That's a little historical fact for you there. Which is part of the reason why it's worth it for Misfortune to do all this nonsense just to get a quartermaster back. It's because they're important. And you can see it there, like, the moment the priestess has summoned back her quartermaster, the moment the priestess turns away, that's when she drops into, like, showing a little bit of vulnerability. Not in front of the priestess, but in front of her, like, in front of her crewman. So this camera angle right here, again, like, this thing plays a lot with camera angles. This camera angle right here is entirely about making the priestess look creepier and scarier to us. By placing us below her, it puts her, like, she's above us in a position of power, but it also makes her look, like, huge and imposing. It makes her look that much scarier when she kind of reaches into onto the box and talks about, like, 1,000 years of suffering with the deep ones, blah, blah, blah. Like, imagine a different camera angle when you looked at her from, like, completely from above, if the camera was situated directly above her, looking down, and she was this, like, very small figure reaching out for the box. Very different mood, very different feeling. It's because the camera angle is positioned the way that it is that you get this feeling of, oh, this is a terrifying cult leader priest witch thing. It's probably bad, actually. And again, love the subtlety of the animation here, because Misfortune hears what the priestess says as well, the thing about, like, 1,000 years of suffering. And so, like, right now she's like, oh, well, thank God I've got him back. And then look at her eyebrows especially, like that little gesture that they're about to do. Like there. Like they come together just a little bit, which I really feel like she could use, like, she's wrinkling her brow, like she's literally knitting her brow right now. You should have some kind of skin folds to kind of show that, but the eyebrows do a decent job of showing that, and so does the gesture of the eye, where you see she does this little half blink that brings her focus away from the quartermaster, and then she stares kind of almost into the middle distance as she parses, like, what are the words that I've just heard? And then she looks over. And here again, character pairs. Like, I talked about how Twisted Fate and Graves, like, they mirror each other's body language. Like, when Graves starts to butt heads and wants to fight over the price, Twisted Fate responds with that same energy. That's the basic, in terms of character animation, of how do you show a connection between two people? Well, have them mirror each other's body language in some way or another. And that's what you get here. Like, that's what these shots are for. The ones where two characters, like, look at each other at the exact same time. And you can see that there's, like, an unspoken communication passing between them. They're both thinking something. And that's what I really like about the interaction here, because it's not 100% Misfortune, I think, who decides to save Twisted Fate and Graves at the end. Like, you can see her eyes narrow, and she's like, well, that's pretty distasteful, but she's not, like, 100% committed yet. And then she looks at him, and he gives her a look like, I mean, I was in that position a second ago, and she's like, well, yeah, probably can't let them do that. And there's all this unspoken communication where it's a little bit like, he looks at her and is like, are we really gonna let her do that? And she's like, well... As we get this, yeah, thoroughly disturbing shot. And that's setup and payoff, by the way, which is, again, is a basic thing in film theory, and also just narrative theory. Setup and payoff, because the card Misfortune pulls out here is the same one that she pulls off the top of the deck right there, and that's the one that she uses to save them with. And again, a lovely little extra gesture. It's not just that she gets up and pokes the card into the slot in the box. She also does this little quick glance over the shoulder just to make sure that the Sea Witch isn't seeing her. And then, again, there it is, that little gesture with the mouth, because she's back in flirty mode, because she's talking to Graves and Twisted Fate inside of the box. So she does that little pouty mouth movement again, that little kissy face thing. and has that little smirk on her face as she ruins everything for the poor sea witch forever. Well, I say poor, but, you know, screw her, because she's scary and terrifying, and probably in service to some kind of Cthulhu monster. And then we're back with the husbands inside the box as they realize that they're going to get out of the situation. And again, look at their energy between each other. Like, because Twisted Fate sees the card, and, like, they're all tangled up in each other. Right? Like, they're a very uncomfortable position. It's not really very convenient for them, but look at their different energy. Like, Twisted Fate has this, again, this kind of much calmer energy, like much more languid, much more serene, much more at peace with what's going on. Whereas Graves, like, instantly is like, get your thing out of my gun, which shifts when Graves realizes that Twisted Fate is talking to him. Then he looks over and it's like, you get this moment of Twisted Fate flipping the card and activating the magic. And there's a little bit itty-bitty subtle thing happening. Look at Graves' eyebrows as the card flips. Like, look at them from that position right there. And that little, like, tiny little release of tension as he goes from, what the hell are you talking about, to, oh, I see. And then that look. Like, that's their dynamic. That's their married couple dynamic. Right there, in those expressions specifically. That's their dynamic as partners. I mean, I know I talk about the married couple thing a lot, but that's their dynamic as partners. That's their dynamic as a double act. Is this thing of like, well, we just found ourselves a way to get out of a sticky situation, and they're both having fun. Like, they're about to be sacrificed to a horrifying sea monster, God knows how many miles below the ocean. But, we found a way out. Now we're having fun. There's another good little gesture here, like Twisted Fate with that little head bob right there. That one. Because again, like, he's very limited in what he can really do with his body language. Given that he's all tangled up in Graves like this. So to preserve that sort of suave trickster energy to him, you give him that one. Like, that little, And then we cut back to the wide, like the shot that we started on. And a little comedy payoff to the whole thing as the card blows up and the Sea Witch is denied.
You gotta catch us first, slimy fish.
Just another beautiful day in Bilgewater.
It really is.
Well played, Captain. You finally landed me.
Don't flatter yourself. I'm after a bigger fish. Your partner.
Now, Graves is too smart to walk into a trap. If you think he'd be stupid enough to bash...
And that is probably the last of the Tales of Runeterra that we will see for quite a long time. So thank you very much for watching this one, as well as potentially, I hope, some of the others. I hope you have enjoyed going through them with me. And if you have enjoyed it, then may I recommend, for your enjoyment, hitting the like, comment, and or subscribe buttons down below this video in whatever order and whatever combination that it may please you. And maybe also hitting the bell icon, because that makes numbers go up, and numbers going up is good on YouTube because of... I don't know, because of algorithm reasons, at least that's what we're always told. So if you want to help me out, then hitting the buttons is a very easy and free way to do that. If you would like to support the channel more directly than that, then Patreon is available for that purpose. I also have a tip jar, and I have a merchandise store. Any of those is available for you if you please, and if you want to use them, then I'd be very grateful. If you don't want to support me directly, though, that's completely okay. But I will encourage you to, generally speaking, support the content that you enjoy with direct contributions whenever possible, because especially in times like these, when there's like pandemic thing going on, ad rates across the internet are plummeting because advertisers are sensing that there's a recession in sight, and like people are getting laid off from work, so they're drawing their advertising out of a lot of online platforms. YouTube has been hit pretty hard. Websites have been hit even harder than that. So if there's an online content creator whose work you enjoy, whether they do YouTube videos or webcomics or whatever it may be, a direct contribution can actually be the same as literally thousands of views on a video or tens of thousands of views on a web page. So if there is content that you enjoy on the internet and you would like people to be able to keep making it in uncertain times, then consider supporting it directly with anything you can, whenever you can, because it matters so much more than you think. Anyway, last thing I have to advertise, I have a second channel where I recently uploaded some episodes of my long stream where I reviewed every single card in the new Legends of Runeterra set. Well, at least every single card that was a unit or a champion. That's in episodes over there, if that's a little bit easier for you to watch than like a 4.5-hour VOD. As well as I have a playthrough of Final Fantasy VIII that's going on over there. There's a playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Remake on that channel, if you want to watch me go through that one, and a playthrough of the original Final Fantasy VII with occasional pepperings of Majora's Mask episodes in between all of that. So if you're interested in any of that, head on over there and give that a like and a comment and a subscribe as well. And I think that's it. I'm done advertising things to you, and I can just tell you here at the end, thank you very much for watching, and please remember to wash your hands.